The day we buried my son, my daughter-in-law leaned toward me and whispered something that still echoes in my ears. "Don't be dramatic, Margaret. Pack your bags and learn to live somewhere else." For a moment I thought I had misheard her. The wind moved quietly through the cemetery trees, the kind of soft spring breeze that carries the scent of fresh grass and polished wood from the caskets. People were still standing around us in dark coats, holding paper cups of coffee and murmuring gentle condolences. My son Daniel had been gone for less than 3 hours, and yet somehow I was the one being told I didn't belong anymore. I stood there beside the folding chairs arranged on the lawn, staring at the white lilies placed over the grave, trying to keep my composure the way Daniel always admired. He used to say I was the strongest woman he knew. I had raised him alone after his father passed away, working double shifts at a small grocery store outside Columbus, Ohio. I still remember the tiny house we lived in back then, barely 900 square feet, with creaky floors and a kitchen window that rattled every time a truck drove past. Daniel used to sit at that window doing homework while I cooked spaghetti on a stovetop that only worked if you tapped the knob just right. When he grew older and finally saved enough for a place of his own, I helped him with the down payment. I never told many people that part because mothers aren't supposed to keep score. We help our children because that's what love looks like. The house Daniel bought was a modest 2-story place about 20 minutes outside the city, with a maple tree in the front yard and a wide porch where he liked to drink his morning coffee. After he married Ashley, I moved into the guest room for a while when my arthritis got worse. Daniel insisted. "Mom, this is your home too," he said more than once. I believed him. For 3 years I cooked Sunday dinners in that kitchen, folded laundry while the evening news played in the background, and watched the seasons change through the same front window Daniel used to look out as a boy. So when Ashley whispered those words at the cemetery, I felt something inside me shift in a way I didn't quite understand yet. House. Noticing how quiet everything felt without Daniel's truck parked beside the garage. When I opened the front door, the familiar smell of coffee and lemon cleaner greeted me. Into the neighborhood. Around 2 in the morning I sat at the small desk beside the window in the guest room, staring at the half-packed suitcase resting on the bed, looking through the pages inside. Most of the documents appeared to be copies of mortgage statements, insurance forms, and bank letters that Daniel had carefully organized with paper clips. I turned each page gently, remembering the way he liked to keep everything neat and labeled. Then one document caught my attention. It was a copy of the original purchase agreement from the day Daniel bought the house. My eyes moved slowly across the printed lines until they reached a section near the middle of the page. Had a short line written in black ink that made me pause. It read, "For Mom, if anything happens." My hand rested on the paper for a moment before I carefully pulled that document from the stack. It was a short legal form, only 2 pages long, but the formatting and official stamps told me it had been prepared by an attorney. I did not fully understand everything written on the page at first glance, but I recognized several important words immediately. There were references to shared financial contribution, property equity, and acknowledgement of funds provided during the purchase of the home. My heart began to beat a little faster, not from excitement, but from a quiet sense that Daniel had thought about this possibility long before any of us imagined such a day would come. I looked toward the closed bedroom door and listened carefully. The television in the living room was still playing softly, and I could hear Ashley moving around in the kitchen. She sounded relaxed, as though everything about the next day had already been settled in her mind. Meanwhile, I sat at the desk under the small lamp, holding a document that suggested the story might not be as simple as she believed. Daniel had not been careless with his plans. If anything, he had always been thoughtful about making sure the people he loved were treated fairly. I read the lines of the document once more, slowly this time, letting each sentence settle clearly in my mind. By the time I finished, the quiet uncertainty I had felt earlier that evening had begun to shift into something steadier. I still missed my son more than words could describe, and nothing could change the sadness that filled the house that night. But as I placed the papers back into the gray folder and closed it gently, one thought remained clear in my mind. Daniel had left more behind than memories, and the morning that Ashley believed would remove me from this home might not unfold the way she expected. I drove slowly through the quiet streets toward the small brick building where Thomas Caldwell kept his office. The courthouse square was just beginning to wake up with a few people walking along the sidewalks and a delivery truck unloading boxes outside a bakery on the corner. I parked along the curb and sat in the car for a moment, holding the gray folder on my lap. The weight of it felt heavier than a few sheets of paper should feel, but I knew that inside those pages might be the explanation Daniel had carefully prepared long before any of us imagined such a day. When I stepped into the building, the hallway smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. A small brass plaque beside one door read Caldwell and Associates. Inside, the office was quiet and orderly. A receptionist greeted me kindly and asked me to have a seat. A few minutes later, a tall man with silver hair and a calm expression stepped out of a nearby office and introduced himself as Thomas Caldwell. His voice was warm but professional as he invited me into his office and gestured toward a chair beside his desk. I placed the gray folder in front of him and explained once again that I had found the documents the night before while packing my things. Mr. Caldwell listened carefully without interrupting, occasionally nodding as if pieces of the story were beginning to fit together. When I finished speaking, he opened the folder and began examining each document one at a time. The room remained very quiet except for the soft sound of paper moving across the desk. Every few minutes he adjusted his glasses and looked more closely at a particular line before turning to the next page. Nearly 15 minutes passed that way before he finally leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. "Margaret," he said gently, "your son was extremely thorough when he prepared these documents." My heart beat a little faster as I waited for him to continue. Mr. Caldwell explained that when Daniel purchased the house, he had made a point of documenting the financial contribution that came from my savings account. According to the paperwork, that down payment was not recorded as a simple gift. Instead, Daniel had asked the attorney to file it as a formal equity contribution connected to the property purchase. Mr. Caldwell turned one of the pages toward me so I could see the paragraph he was referring to. The wording stated clearly that the funds I had provided represented a financial stake in the property itself. In other words, the house was not entirely owned by Daniel alone. The documents recognized that a portion of the home's value was directly tied to my investment. I felt a quiet rush of disbelief and gratitude at the same time. Daniel had never mentioned it so directly, but in his careful and thoughtful way he had made sure that my support for his future was never forgotten. Mr. Caldwell continued reviewing the final document marked with the small yellow note Daniel had written. After reading it again, he looked at me with a steady expression. "Your son wanted to make certain that if anything unexpected happened, your financial interest in that house would be protected under the law," he said. The words settled slowly in the quiet room. For the first time since the day before, the uncertainty that had followed me since the cemetery began to lift slightly. Ashley believed that by the end of the day, I would quietly disappear from the house Daniel loved. But as I sat across from the attorney's desk listening to the explanation of my son's careful planning, I began to understand that Daniel had not left his mother without protection. I left Mr. Caldwell's office with the gray folder held carefully against my chest, stepping out into the late morning sunlight that filled the courthouse square. The air felt warmer than it had earlier that morning, and for the first time since Daniel's funeral, I noticed the quiet sounds of ordinary life moving around me. A couple walked past carrying grocery bags, a city bus stopped at the corner, and somewhere nearby a bell above a cafe door rang as someone stepped inside. The world had not stopped the way my heart had. Yet as I walked back toward my car, Mr. Caldwell's explanation repeated clearly in my mind. The money I had given Daniel years ago had not simply disappeared into the purchase of the house. According to the documents, it had been recorded as a financial share connected directly to the property. That meant something important. It meant that the house was not entirely controlled by Ashley the way she believed. Daniel had taken the time to make sure that the support I gave him would remain recognized under the law. I sat behind the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine, letting that realization settle slowly. Mr. Caldwell had also explained another detail before I left his office. Because the contribution had been formally documented, any decision about the house would require acknowledging that financial interest. The property could not simply be treated as though it belonged to one person alone. Daniel had arranged everything carefully, not out of suspicion or conflict, but because he believed that fairness mattered. I drove back toward the neighborhood where the maple tree still stood in the front yard, thinking about the quiet way my son had protected the people he loved. When I turned onto our street, a large white moving truck was already parked along the curb in front of the house. Two men stood beside the open back door of the truck reviewing a clipboard. Ashley's car was in the driveway, and through the front window, I could see her moving around inside the living room. She looked busy and confident, as if the day was unfolding exactly the way she had planned. I parked along the opposite side of the street and sat there for a moment watching the scene. The movers eventually walked up the driveway and rang the doorbell. Ashley opened the door and greeted them with a polite smile, pointing down the hallway in the direction of the guest room. From where I sat in the car, I could see her speaking with quick gestures, explaining what needed to be moved. She did not look outside once. She believed I had already accepted my place in the story she had written for me. I picked up my handbag from the passenger seat and felt the gray folder resting safely inside. Mr. Caldwell's final words returned to my mind as clearly as if he were sitting beside me in the car. He had told me that the documents Daniel prepared gave me every right to address the situation properly and calmly. There was no need for arguments or raised voices. The truth written in those pages was strong enough on its own. I stepped out of the car and closed the door gently behind me. The movers were just beginning to walk down the hallway when I reached the front porch. Through the open door, I could hear Ashley telling them which furniture belonged in the truck. When I crossed the threshold and entered the house, she turned toward me with a look of mild surprise, clearly not expecting my return so soon. But this time I was not carrying only a suitcase. I was carrying the truth Daniel had carefully left behind.